I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Ramzi. I am the AI Innovation Team Lead at General Motors Canada. And just like many of you in Toronto, I'm in desperate need of a haircut. Okay, so let me start here by sharing my screen. All right, so today we're going to talk about how to jumpstart your internal AI initiative and set it for production level success. Just a little bit of a background. When I first joined General Motors, I joined in 2016. I was the first data scientist at GM Canada, and I was hired as a speech recognition systems engineer. But after we saw the ample opportunity there is to apply AI in different facets of the company, I was tasked to create the AI strategy for GM Canada. And everything I'm going to talk about today is really the extract of my experience building the initiative at General Motors Canada. I'm going to start by talking why an internal AI initiative and why not go with outsourcing. Then we're going to go into the project selection process. Like, you could use AI into almost any field. It's so versatile. So which project to start with, and then how to execute an AI project and really set it up for production level success. What are the steps we need to take there? And then in terms of talent, do we want to have it a centralized or a distributed fashion within the company? And then we're going to end up with a summary. So going back to the question, why internal AI initiative and not external? So every time you're tackling a new technology, you always have the choice either to build the talent in-house or outsource it to a supplier. So let's start with the talent. If you consider the talent, it's always better to go with a supplier because you don't have to hire the very scarce AI talent and you don't have to develop it. It's already mature at the supplier level. So that counts as 1 point for outsourcing. Something else that AI requires is a very strong infrastructure. Like, we're talking databases, we're talking GPUs, we're talking the connection between both, and there's a lot of DevOps related to it. So it's going to be an investment that the company needs to take to put it in-house. And for that, we give that point to outsourcing. Now, for in-house, what are the advantages of having your internal AI initiative in-house? Well, there are two. The first one is data access. Now, no matter how much you can share with an outside supplier, depending on the contract you have with them and the statement of work, or statement development work, there's always some confidential data that it's going to be very difficult to share with the supplier. And AI feeds on data, so the more data you have access to, the better you're set up for success. That's why data access goes to in-house initiatives. The second one is domain expertise. Now, the supplier might have some domain expertise, but it's never going to be the same level as an in-house either talent or team that is specialized for either decades, depending on your company, or less than that. But domain expertise is a very crucial element in developing a successful AI solution, just because you need to be able to learn or be an expert on how to look and slice the data, which is very important. The other thing that kind of tips the scale towards an internal solution versus an outsource is the uncertain requirements. AI is a data-driven approach, which means that there's no way we could predict what requirement, like am I looking for 90% accuracy or 85? What false positives or false negatives I'm looking for? I will not be able to set those requirements for the suppliers. So for that reason, it is better to have it in-house. Now, this is only the case because the usual relationship between a company and its suppliers, that you need to specify the requirement and statement, and they need to deliver, you get paid on that. So we've run into some examples where we wanted to work with a supplier for an AI solution or project, and we accuracy because that's what is required by the project lead. The supplier is not able to guarantee that output just for the sake of the nature of AI. Now, having said that, depending on the company you're in, sometimes you already have an infrastructure that can support your AI work, or you have some talent that is already AI capable. And for that reason, I do believe for a production successful AI initiative, it needs to be in-house, or at least needs to start in-house, with the exception of finding a solution that really perfectly fits your needs that an outside supplier has ready for you. Now, talking about which project to select. Now, if you work in a high-tech company like Google, and your CEO is very passionate about AI, then there is no question about it. AI will be embedded into every fabric of the company, into every project. But the question here is, what about non-high-tech companies? Which projects should we start with? And that's a big question that I was asked at the beginning of my journey. So to answer that question, we look at it from an economics perspective. In every company, there's always supporting and primary activities. Now, what are those? So primary activities are the activities surrounding your main product, your flagship product. And it goes from raw material to actually developing the product to marketing and servicing at the end. However, each company cannot operate successfully without its support activities, and that goes from HR to legal to purchasing to procurement, and those are activities that are usually not very well talked about, but they're very essential to the business. So let's look at the advantages of each one of them. So for support activities, which is not customer facing, you have a high and quick savings that you can gain on operational cost. Usually support activities are not very high tech, and people do not look at them as a first candidate to utilize AI or leverage AI to optimize them. If you do optimize one supporting activity, it goes company-wide, depending if the company is global or not, the impact will be even more significant. And usually they have soft requirements, performance requirements. So they will not have a very specific accuracy or a very specific false positive that they're looking for. Everything you're going to add is on top, is savings. Now, for primary activities, it does have its own advantages. It creates a competitive advantage against your competitors within the same industry or even sometimes in a similar industry. It is very critical to retain talent. Always wants to work on the flagship product that you are developing in the company. However, it does have hard requirements because it is customer facing. The company cannot afford not to guarantee a specific accuracy or performance when it goes to the customer. We found that the best balance between the two is to have a 50-50 split. So half of your projects or initiatives will go to supporting activity and the other half goes to primary activity. Now, the supporting activity is very important because it will showcase the effectiveness of AI in generating dollar values for the business, and it will buy you more rope that you could use to work on more innovative projects with the primary activity. On top of that, you do need a value model. So you're going to get a lot of proposals on each side, and you need a value model. What we found works best with leadership is to use the best value model, which is dollar value. Now, obviously, sometimes for innovative projects, the dollar value is not very clear. However, there are ways to estimate that. Another component that we found was the initiative be successful both on the leadership, but also making sure that the product goes into production, is to leverage the strategic insight that a steering committee can give you. So usually steering committee is composed of directors from that control different organizations within the company. And that gives you a good perspective of what the company is really looking for to execute with AI and where's the biggest opportunity that they think you should be working on. So if you have all these checks and balances, you are sure that you're working on the best projects that will showcase the effectiveness of AI in your company. Now we're going to move to how to execute an AI project. And obviously, I know there's a lot of material on the internet on how to execute them. I decided here to bring a more abstracted version. And I do believe the first step is the most important step. Now, given that AI is data-driven, and as we discussed before, we cannot really set a very hard requirement, we found it necessary to do a first stage called a technical feasibility assessment. Now, what do we do in the technical feasibility assessment? We try to answer the question, is the data rich enough? So you're given a data set and you're given an objective or an insight to extract from that data set. It's not clear at the beginning if that's going to be sufficient, the data that you're given. Now, you might have an inkling based on your experience and the domain expertise on if it's going to be successful, but you will not try it. So what we decided to do is when you start with a technical feasibility assessment, you do a simplified process. And what I mean by that is really you try the most obvious questions. So that means, what are the most obvious features in this data set I can use? What are the most obvious machine learning algorithms that would be a great fit for such a problem? Pre-processing and post-processing, same thing. So we try to, in a short period of time, do a very simplified process to see if the data is really rich enough to get us that insight that we're looking for. And the results you get obviously are not the final results, but it will give you an inkling or an indication of how far from the target you are. So if you're looking at an 85% accuracy, if the internal customer is looking for an 85% accuracy, and after your technical feasibility assessment with the obvious answers, you find that you're at 20%, then there needs to be a little bit more to be done if the project is really a priority. Either you get more data or you completely rethink your process. However, if your target is 85, but you find yourself in the 72, 68, then you say, okay, there are more features I could use. There's more I could do in the next stage, which is the core development. So you dive deeper into each step of the pipeline, and you make sure you do the best you can in each step to try to get to the target the customer is looking for. Now, to be able to do that, you definitely need to partner with the internal customer. This is more the middle stage is really a partnership between the two entities, and we do leverage an iterative model. In this case, we leverage Scrum, which is an agile approach, and we make sure that for every iteration, every release, we get the feedback from the customer on if they think these features are providing what they should be providing. If we do a feature study, do they see the ranking? Does it make sense from their domain expertise perspective? Now, once you're successful in the first two stages, now we're going to talk about production and deployment. Now, there are multiple ways you could do this. Either you are deployment capable, which means you're using a particular a platform that allows you to share a particular API that gets you access to the machine learning model, or you could partner with an existing IT organization. So IT organizations in different companies, they're used to productionizing and making available enterprise-level solutions. So they would take your model, being an innovation house, and they would integrate it and offer it to the rest of the company. So model integration and similar performance over time. How do you guarantee similar performance over time? So data distributions change. Like even if you trained on 3 years, 4 years, 5 years worth of data, you're not 100% guaranteed that the data distribution is not going to change over time. So either you set up an online learning mechanism, which is not very mature as of today. The other alternative is to try to set up an automatic retraining. So the same way you've selected your data for your training, you should apply the same logic going in the future. What we found best is that there's always the human element in it. You don't completely discard it. You should always have a human element that either randomly checks the results of the AI model, and by doing that, it will feed into the training set for the future iterations of the model. All right, now we're going to talk about centralized or distributed talent. Like, what is the best way to do it to work here? Do we create a center of excellence in the center of the company, or do we have AI capable talent distributed in every team that may require AI talent? Now, both of them have advantages and disadvantages, obviously, but what we found works best to guarantee production success at the end of the day is to do a hybrid approach. So how do we do this hybrid approach? We created this rotational program. So we started with a centralized team, given that the AI talent is very scarce and it's very competitive to get that talent into the company. So you start with a core team, and then you start getting people who may be interested, or their teams may benefit from great AI talent, to rotate into the center of excellence for a 6 months, 1 year period, where they learn how to look at a problem from an AI perspective and how to apply it, but most importantly, how to spot a project that would benefit greatly from leveraging AI. Now, what would that do? It will create a core of ambassadors for the center of excellence, the AI center of excellence, in the different teams throughout the company. And it will get you more exposure, and you'll eventually get more proposals, which will help you pick the right ones for production level success. Now, is it enough to do a rotational program to spread the knowledge of AI within the company? We believe it is not. We also have a component called an AI culture. So what do we mean by AI culture? So most legacy companies, non-high-tech companies, didn't really work with AI for decades. And when you present AI to them, they always look at it as a black box, that they do not really understand how it works inside. And people might not want to work with a black box, especially if it's a core activity of the business and if it's a customer-facing feature. So for that reason, we have a task for the centralized team, the center of excellence, to train multiple people throughout the company to give webinars, lunch and learns, and make sure that everybody throughout the company gets more comfortable with the idea of leveraging AI in their day-to-day life or jobs. Now, what would that result into? The rotational program plus the AI culture, you would increase adoption. And adoption is a very important component for what we call production level success. Because if you do something that works, nobody uses, there's no real business value added there. Now, as a summary, we do believe that a balance between an exploitative AI and explorative AI. Exploitative is really creating and detecting and creating efficiencies in your support activities. And explorative is how to innovate and create that competitive advantage into your primary activities and the product that is the flagship of the company, while using the value model, in this case, a dollar-based value model, and the strategic insight of a steering committee will ensure you work on the right projects that will make it to the production level success. You always start with a technical feasibility assessment so you don't lose a lot of investment early on in case the project is not really feasible. and you end up with a big focus on deployment and maintenance, either by your own team or by the IT organization. And then to increase adoption, you need a hybrid approach for centralized and distributed to make sure that you get the benefit of both of them and spread the AI culture within the company, which will also increase adoption. All right, that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'll go now to look at the chat and see if I can answer any questions. So I have a question here from Ariel. He asks, how would you recommend vetting members of the steering committee? Are you looking for domain leaders who will champion AI solutions? So the answer to that is yes. You are looking for domain leaders to champion your AI solutions in an indirect manner. So the fact that leaders sit on that steering committee and they actually see your list of projects you're working on, that inherently gives you that championing aspect of it. When you talk about domain expertise, we do like to kind of diversify the kinds of leaders that we have on the board or the council, and that really gives us. We're more looking for that external look to say, okay, I'm a leader comes from a business like background, and they're like, okay, in my organization, this project doesn't really make sense because the company is going out of business. Going out of that business. So we're more interested in this other project that we're starting to ramp up. So it gives you that strategic insight that you as a contributor or mid-level management might not have. I hope that answers your question. Okay, so second question is, how do you minimize downtime of production AI models? So the way we currently do it, so I haven't really prepared about this question, but the way we currently do minimize the downtime of a production AI model is by making sure that the live model, the model that works today, is always active. And while it's active, we're always collecting training data, always collecting anything that has been verified by humans, or we are sure that it is a new either class or we have other annotations for it, but if it's a new class and we need to retrain on it, then we add it to the training set. We train in parallel while the production level model is going live. And then once it's done, it's in the middle of the night, the two models switch, and we have something we call a continuous validation program. We have a dashboard that continuously monitors the performance of the model, and there are different metrics that you can choose depending on the project you're working on, obviously, to make sure that your model is really performing the way you want it to perform. I hope that answers the question. Can you tell? So another question from Ryan. Can you tell us a bit more about how you implemented your rotational program? Did you get pushback from other internal teams? Like, obviously, you're going to get pushback, and the reason you're going to get pushback is because a particular organization or a team, they have invested in a particular number of talent or engineers, and they're not looking to get you to take 6 months or a year of one headcount in their team. However, there's always a conversation and a balance. If you do get the 6 months or 1 year out of their team, what are you giving back? You're giving back somebody who is now AI capable. They have some level of AI understanding. They can spot when a project that comes across to them is really can benefit greatly from AI. That's one. Second, they will have a basic understanding of statistical models and statistical approaches that they can apply into the day-to-day lives or jobs when they go back to the team. So it's really a balance. Not every team will allow it, but depending on the manager you're talking to, there are compromises to be made. Right. So another question from Ashwin: can it be a combination of in-house and outsource? If so, when do we do in-house and when do we do outsource? That's a great question, Ashwin. So in-house and outsource, I believe they always exist together, always. And I do believe in-house, it's you focus on in-house when you're doing something that is more from an explorative perspective. Like you're exploring the use of AI in your legal department, or you're exploring the use of AI in your purchasing department, or even in your main product. Outsource is really, you always go to outsource for AI when you have two conditions. The first one, you are very time limited. You have a very strict deadline on a product being launched at a certain time. And the second condition is that that particular supplier has the perfect solution that your company would benefit from or your product would benefit from. So there is really no need to develop all that product. If it's already exists there, why reinvent the wheel in-house? It actually makes more sense to go outsource. So I do believe they always exist together. But if we're talking about initiative, if we're talking about exploring how to use AI and leverage it into your organization, I do believe in-house is the way to go. But for product-related AI projects, I do believe outsourcing can also be a very viable option. Right, another question from Fan. Can you talk more about your agile setting? Length of sprint, size of team, deliverables at each sprint? All right, great question. Okay, so I'm going to start with the length of sprint. So we do use 3 weeks long sprint. We started with 2 weeks, but we decided to go 3 weeks because we wanted to make sure we give the data scientists enough time to create their documentation, to test, to do unit tests and integration tests. So we wanted to make sure that everything, the output of a particular sprint is very robust. So we decided to extend it to 3 weeks. Size of the team. So for data science in particular, it's very sensitive. Because if you have 5 people, 5 data scientists in particular, working on one project, it may create confusion. So you have a diseconomies of scale in this case. And what that means is that if you go beyond 2 or 3 data scientists on one project, and obviously there's always the machine learning engineer, the data analyst, and the DevOps person and whatnot, those are like supporting roles. But in terms of data scientists, I believe for each project, you shouldn't exceed 2 or 3 data scientists per project. And you can have in this, so we found that a hybrid model for us. So when we have one sprint for a team, we cover more than one project. You can have multiple projects in the same team, in the same sprint. And what that allows is that even though I'm not working on that project, I am attending the Scrum meetings for it. I'm attending the sprint review. I am able to provide my insight based on my previous experience or an experience similar to what you're doing there, to be able to help each other out. And the last one is deliverable at each sprint. So the deliverables at each sprint are very much related to the steps I showed earlier, which is technical feasibility assessment and core development. Obviously, we won't have a deliverable each sprint. What the deliverables, we call them releases. So each sprint, there's an incremental progress of the project, but the release is usually 2 to 3 sprints long, where you can actually go and present to the customer. And some customers would like to be more engaged than others. Some customers would like an update every sprint. So it really depends on your project and your customer. Hope that answers the question. Okay, so Damien asked, on the topic of centralized versus distributed model, how do you handle budget? Practically, who pays for the bill? AI team or line of business? Similarly, what does the reporting line falls? So that's a very good question, Damien. And at the end of the day, there's no clear answer to that. For the centralized team, obviously, it is the AI organization or whomever is supporting the AI organization that pays for it. But when you're talking about rotational and making it hybrid and whatnot, that will have to come from the business, but you have to convince that business unit that this investment is worth it. Now, there are other cases where what we found is if there's an organization that really requires AI, but they don't have the talent for it, they can pay for a particular number of data scientists to join the team. They will be part of the centralized team, but their work will be fully dedicated to that line of business who is paying, eventually paying for their bill. So that's also another hybrid approach that you can take. that has been proven to work. All right, Dave, do you have any strategies for explaining complex ideas to senior management to get buy-in? Obviously, if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to get any buy-in from your leadership. So it is very important to be able to explain AI to your managers or to your senior managers to make sure that you get the buy-in to either invest in your team or even to launch or productionize your model. And the answer to that is it's not easy to. So I will say there are two ways we can tackle this problem. The first one is part of what I talked about earlier, the AI culture. So when we do the lunch and learns and training, we have versions that are strictly dedicated to senior management, and that is to make sure that all of the senior managers have at least a basic understanding of what is AI, how to use it, and what's the benefit of leveraging it in your company. Actually, my senior manager bought a book on how to build your first neural network, and that kind of got him even to be an even bigger supporter for the AI initiative. So the culture piece is very critical. The second way of tackling this particular caveat is the data scientist or whomever is representing the data science team needs to really learn how to speak the business language. And if you go to my LinkedIn, you'll see that I'm an MBA candidate right now. So I'm taking MBA courses to make sure that my language, my understanding, the terms I talk about, and the way I present my problems or solutions will be in business language. And that really helps with getting buy-in from your leadership. Right, awesome. So there are more questions, and I believe I'm already over time. So I think this session stays on. So whomever is here, you can stay on. If you want to go to another session, I think you can. So the next question is from Motassim Salam. This might be very topic, but do you feel the staff attrition problem is bigger in AI, machine learning, data science than other software engineering fields? How would you handle it for a small team? So to be honest with you, I haven't really seen a lot of staff attrition in our team, and there is a very real reason for that. So when you talk about top tier talent, top tier AI talent, we're really talking about how to make them comfortable because there's a lot of competition for them. So the attrition problem is very real in the industry. So the way we got around this problem is by recognizing that these top tier talent really, they come from, they're not undergrad. They come from graduate studies, masters or PhDs. So they come from a research environment. And a research environment is way closer to R&D than production. And when we're talking about bringing ML or AI solutions to production, we don't really mean to get the culture of production and put it and apply it to the AI team, which is like very close deadlines, very high pressure. You need to deliver right away, and this is how you need to deliver. So the way we found that the best balance between them is to actually have a bit of both. So the environment within the team needs to be a little bit more relaxed than a production level, but at the same time, not have it completely open-ended. So it needs to be needs to have its own deadlines, but they need to be a little bit more relaxed, especially if you don't have a particular product that you're waiting to deliver. So that balance between production environment and research environment is very critical to keep and retain your talent into your team, especially for a small team, like you mentioned. All right, so the next question from Sebastian. Determine ROI for the new program adoption. Is the rotational program implemented as part of the cost center? So two questions really. So the first one, determine ROI for new program adoption. So I'm guessing here it's really ROI for the innovation, for the explorative innovation, product-centric projects. So for those, ROI can be very tricky. So, and we found that it is really up to the domain expert. You need to work with the person who's requesting that proposal to understand first of all, why are they working on that project? So if there is no business reason or business case for them working on that project, then the team shouldn't really be working on it either. And that is a very important point, because when you start building a team, you're very hungry for new projects to come your way, and you want to execute. You want to showcase that AI is effective within the company. But if you start working and delivering on projects that they don't really deliver that business value that the leadership is looking for, then you're not really advocating for your team. It's really not about quantity; it's about quality. So it is really important to be able to select projects that have a very at least deterministic ROI. Even if it's a little bit vague at the beginning, eventually there are methods with the domain expert for them to say, this is why I'm working on it, and then you can extrapolate on that. And then the second part is rotational program implemented as part of the cost center. Honestly, I don't really know the relationship between the rotational and the cost center, so maybe you could follow up on that offline. All right, next question is from, it is 10 o'clock. I do have a meeting. I have still work today, so I do have a meeting to attend to. I will get to these questions, and I'll communicate with the TMLS team to see how I can deliver the responses and the answers. But thank you very much for attending today, and I hope to see you soon in person.